Isten hozta önöket, sok szeretettel köszöntünk mindenkit a Nemzetközi Eukarisztikus Kongresszus 5. napján itt a Hung Expón. Én Tóth Zsófia vagyok, a Magyar Katolikus Rádió bemondója. Tegnap David Maria Jéger online előadását hallhattuk, a Szentföld az Eukarisztia földje címmel. Bízunk benne, hogy a mai előadás is hasonlóan nagy érdeklődésre tart majd számot. 35 évvel ezelőtt alapította Milánóban a Szent Károly papi testvériséget Massimo Camisasca. A céljuk az, hogy a papok ne éljenek elszigeteltségben, hanem kisebb közösségekben. Segítsék, támogassák egymást. Massimo Camisasca 2012 óta az észak-olasz Reggio Emilia egyházmegye püspöke. 50 könyv szerzője, emellett széles körben ismert a művészetek iránti fogékonyságáról, ragyogó nevelői és fáradhatatlan papi szolgálatáról. A püspök börtönpasztoráció alkalmával találkozott egy emberölésért 30 évre elítélt férfival. Hosszú ideig leveleztek, és az elítélt részben ezeknek hatására szerzetesi fogadalmat tett. A kettejük levelezéséből Camisasca püspök a következő gondolatot emelte ki. A valódi börtönbüntetés nem a fogság, hanem odakint Jézus Krisztus fénye nélkül élni.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Bishop of Reggio Emilia.
Diocese dell'Italia del Nord.
It's a northern Italian diocese, not far from Bologna. Somebody heard about Bologna, I'm sure. Some of you.
È una regione questa in cui si trova Bologna.
This region, Bologna is the capital of this region, this Emilia-Reggio.
Dalla seconda guerra mondiale.
Suffered because of the Second World War a lot.
E soprattutto è stata segnata dalla guerra civile.
Mainly, this is the civil war caused a lot of suffering in Italy, which happened from 43 to 46, 1943 to 1946. It lasted 3 years. 3 years of war against German, against fascist Repubblica Sociale, and mainly 3 years of death and destruction. And a lot of innocent people died. I'd like to summarize a written text now, which I'll leave it for you, but I cannot read it all along because it would be too long. What is the origin of this lot of tragedies, these deaths, a lot of destruction? What is the root of all these? The political, behind we can find the political fight, and mainly 2 atheist dictatorships, the fascist and the communist dictatorship. One of my predecessors, the Bishop Socchi, bishop of this same diocese, who was the bishop of this region at the end of the Second World War, he said that these dictatorships were not only atheistic, but was completely against God. This was a very active atheism, which decided to fight against God, fight against priests. This was the historical reason of the martyrdom of a lot of priests in our region and all over Italy. You can ask, why do we deal with this historic background in a Eucharistic Congress? The Eucharist, what is the root of the Eucharist? Where does the Eucharist come from? It comes from the cross and from the resurrection of Christ. The Eucharist is the presence of Christ in history. Bread and wine, under the species of the bread and wine, they imply death, but they imply life as well. The unjust death, and a life which is the root of a new creation. That's why I like to speak about martyrs, Italian martyrs. It is not a distant question, not far away from a topic of a Eucharistic Congress. Their martyrdom is a kind of event which implies the history of death and resurrection. This is a participation in the sacrifice of Christ, from which a big renewal started. We can say now, as historians, as faithful, if Italy resurrected from its ruins, can mainly thank to the death of these brothers from their love, which resurrected before our eyes. Jesus said that no one has greater love than the one who gives his life to his brothers, his friends. There's another reason why I evoke these events of the Second World War. Unfortunately, even today, even 75 years after the events, there is no commemoration to this event. There is no real reconciliation, even among faithful. Though there were a lot of members of our church, and that church organized a lot of events to encourage the faithful to reach, to attain reconciliation. We'd like them to forgive each other. I'd like to mention two important events which happened in the recently. Rolando Rivi, was a young seminarist who became a martyr at the age of 14. He was killed by the communist partisans. Pope Francis, he was beatified by Pope Francis at the beginning of his papacy. This boy, this young seminarist, was the victim of some partisans, some extremist partisans. One of them, the murderer, the killer, his killer, exactly, said what happened, what really happened. The daughter of this killer came to the church where the remainings of Rolando rest to ask for pardon for the deeds of his father. When she realized that that her father was the killer, And it was a story of a conversion. With these words, she asked pardon. Christ, this woman was completely atheist. Christ saved every man, everybody. Before his death on the cross, with his last breath, he forgave to his killers. Grant that what the dividing hatred divided could be united again. In the holy heart of Jesus, in the love of the holy heart of Jesus and the name of his Father. And finally, she added that grant that these seminarists, the smile of this seminarist could be reflected on your faces. And amongst you, my fathers, end of quotation. Not long ago, another event happened. It's quite important. Don Pasquino Borghi, who was a priest of my church, was executed together with 8 partisans by the fascists in January 1944. His killer was 17 years old at that time. Don Pasquino wrote immediately to the mothers of the mother of the killer. My son, based on the example of my son for reconciliation of the souls, what he wished in his life, I forgive the one who really realized this unjust deed. This boy, who was 90 years old, who was a killer, wrote these words: I, Sergio, who was very young at the time, after the execution, I was completely sure. Immediately after the execution, I was sure that this father forgave me. My mother understood it, and she immediately wrote to the mother of the died priest. That's what she wrote. My son will never forget this tragic morning. And this memory will always encourage him to strive to do good in all his life. The killer wrote to me, from that moment I strive to find the meaning of my life in helping the sick and needy. And every day I asked for the intercession of that man in my prayer, the blood of whom became a light. The Holy Spirit works. Personally, I'd like to reach the beatification process of every killed Italian priest during the Second World War. These introductory thoughts served to explain these priests were not the people of withdrawer, they even sacrificed their life. The reason of it their love for their brothers and sisters, not a political. It had not a political reason. The reason is the testimony about Christ, who was recognized as the Lord of the history. Even 75 years after the events, it's quite difficult to say how many priests were killed exactly. Partly in our region, Emilia-Romagna, in my diocese, or in all over Italy. Each death were implemented in different way. So there were some death who died. There were some people who died after the injuries after a certain time, and many were forgotten. One thing is sure, that the numbers, be they not exact, they are quite amazing and surprising. Independently of the fact, independently of their sympathy and politics, all these priests are the witnesses of love. They were ready to give their own life, to offer their own life to save other people's lives, because they were convinced that peace cannot be reached through war, only by giving their life, offering their life. Their murder their sacrifice came from their faithfulness to their vocation. Now I'd like to speak about the historical facts a little bit. On the 8th of September 1943, it's when Italy decided to leave the covenant with the Germans and made an agreement with the USA and England. This change for Italy in northern Italy and the Middle Italy. Middle Italy was practically German, so occupied by German people, German army. And the southern Italy is occupied by Americans and English soldiers who arrived there. So it was, the situation was worse in the northern part of Italy. There was a civil war between those in the northern Italy who fought against the Nazi oppressors and against communists, and those who, from fear or from supported the fascist government. So between 1943 and 1945, and sometimes this period lasts until 1948. In Italy, about 300 priests were killed in this period, partly by Nazi fascists, partly by the communists, because of hatred. Italy, in these 19 months, was the place of the martyrdom of clergy, as it happened in Mexico and in Spain. I told you before that there are a lot of events which are not documented, or perhaps there are only obscure memory. But there are a lot of documents which can be found in the archives of the parishes about these story of martyrdoms. We speak about the story of martyr priests. Under the hands of the killers, be they left-handed or right-handed, there was always an ideology. The ideology of classes, social classes, or the ideology of protecting God or the homeland. But in fact, it were completely perverse ideologies. We can say that the 300 priests are exactly, this is the number. We have about 300 martyr priests.
So, which were those two biggest centers of the opposition? Well, one of these was the word of the seminaries. Mostly the seminaries in the 1930s and 40s, so they were the centers of resistance. And they were at the same time, so not only the schools of the sacrament, but also the school of freedom fighters. So these seminaries provided teachings that did not accept the guidance of the state, and young people who decided to become priests could be told what the freedom of Christians in reality means, so what freedom in church means. Besides, these schools, Catholic press also played a really important role so that it didn't let the flame of freedom to disappear. So Christians in both these places wanted to fight for the freedom of everyone. So they didn't want to fight for only one side, but they wanted to fight for freedom in general. Well, the first wave of murdering the priests covered around 100 people, and it was the result of the work of the Nazi fascists. And it was mostly focusing on it mostly happened in the first part of 1944. So back then the resistance didn't operate, or hadn't operated yet. And you know, there were priests who refused to hand over Jews to the Nazi fascists, and young people hiding from conscription, members of the first partisan organizations. They tried to protect the first partisans, as mentioned before, or Americans, or English. So they were priests who were not ready to betray their own followers. They didn't let the people be alone. They didn't leave them alone. They didn't abandon them in difficult circumstances, in times of mass reprisals and revenge. So this was the first wave. And then, mostly after 1945, there came the communist partisans who wanted to just have or exercise their power over the entire opposition, And you know, the Communist Party, so they created a very atheist wing of the Communist Party. They wanted to focus on materialism and anti-clericalism. This was their most important propaganda. They were fighting against Christianity, and this is in which they followed the example of the Soviet Union. Hence, at the operational level, the murders of political opponents, the plundering of the population, and the attacks, which then triggered the harsh reprisals by the Nazi fascists among the population. Well, at the same time, non-communist partisans groups were also established, even Catholic partisan groups who were really important players in the fight against the fascists. They use different methods. They try to protect the population, paying attention to what is called the humanization of the war, namely the utmost defense or utmost protection of life, rejection of preaching of hatred, and the avoidance of acts that could make the process of reconciliation more difficult in later times. Catholic partisans wanted to reduce the influence of communism, but they didn't manage to do so. They didn't manage to eliminate that. From the end of 1944, priests started to become the victims of the communists. I have to tell you that many civilians, many laymen also lost their lives, mostly members of the Actio Catholica movement. They were victims of this wave of violence. And in the written version, I describe it in more detail, so what happened and how. Now let's return to Emilia-Romagna. So there were around 300 people there. This is in my region. There were 64 deliberate murders of priests, in addition to the 59 cases that can be attributed to the war. Several researchers have attempted to count the number of victims of the Nazi fascist and the communists. It's very difficult to add up these figures. Based on the most recent figures, 8 people were killed by the fascists, 29 by Nazi soldiers, 27 by the communist partisans. So, mostly in my diocese, which is the second after Bologna. In Bologna, there were 18 people who became victims, and in Reggio Emilia, 11. Let's have a look at who these priests were who lost their lives. I mean, the previously mentioned 18 and 11 priests. So they are priests who rebelled out of love. It means that they sacrificed their lives, not for personal gain or not for the victory of a certain party or ideology for one of the sides, in quotation marks. But what they did is that they sacrificed their lives for the freedom and good of all people, including those who claimed to be and in fact were their enemies. The Italian Church immediately remembered its priests even back in 1945. So they were united in the single flame of love. The Bishop of Reggio Emilia on the 18th of May 1945, drafted a letter to his priest, and I quote, "Beyond the grave there is no hostility. Your devotions must reach, in addition to the natural preferences of love, all souls, friends and enemies, sons of all peoples and all nations, representatives of all parties, of all ideas, so that for them also you may humbly ask God's forgiveness and mercy. At the same time, ask God to grant human souls the grace to rest in the spirit of true Christian love and brotherhood." Unquote. If we read the story of these previously mentioned 11 priests, then we will immediately recognize that there is a mutual point in these priests. Namely, they were killed because of the hatred against Christ, and they accepted their death in a manner that they continuously prayed for them. You know, at the end of the Second World War, our church continuously, or from then, our church have been remembering its martyrs without being distributed. For example, in 1958, there was a solemn commemoration held in Reggio Emilia for all the Italian priests who had been victims of murder. So in 1958, so only 13 years after the end of the war. So this was the first commemoration about the Italian priests who lost their lives. And on this very occasion, Cardinal Giuseppe Siri delivered a speech. And this is exactly what he said. The lives of these murdered priests show that they follow Jesus Christ when they were seized by pain, when barbarous acts hit them, and it could rightly be said of them that they have become partakers of Christ's sufferings. Unquote. So we need to remember them as the sufferings of Christ was told by the evangelists. So martyrdom here is in the focal point. And this, and then he continues, Cardinal Siri continues, this is how their memory should be read and preserved in the same way as the evangelists, because they wanted to serve this very purpose. Now, let me speak for 15 minutes about the commemoration of Happy Rolando Rivi for various reasons. So I'd like to call your attention to the very fact that he was, or he has been, the single martyr who have been beatified since the Second World War. And secondly, he attended a seminary, so he was a seminarian person who didn't do anything wrong, and he could have returned to his ordinary life, namely to his Christian mission. He was a very kind young boy. And you know, he wanted to just get closer to Christian partisans. But you know, he was hated by the communist partisans. He was kidnapped by the communists and killed in a barbarous manner. I do not want to get into more detail. He was a young boy who is now really an example of holiness for every single young boy in our church. We collected his bones in a tiny little village, and there is a small chapel dedicated to him. So from among the martyrs of Reggio, he should be highlighted. Just a 14-year-old seminarian who was killed on the 13th of April 1945, just 12 days before the end of the war.
Era nato il 7 gennaio del 1931 in una parrocchia.
On the 7th of January so he was born on the 7th of January 1931 in Castellarano. His family participated in the life of the parish. His father was a singer in the choir.
Alla celebrazione delle feste.
And well, you know, in this matter, he helped the celebrations to be even more solemn, and you know, the entire family was active in the parish life. And of course, the priest also played a really important role in the life of this young boy. In summer 1942, when Rolando was only 11, he expressed his wish, he told his parents that he wanted to enter the minor seminary of Marola, located in the hills of Reggio. You know, he was a very joyful boy. He loved playing football, and he had a fantastic fantasy. And you know, he did know that he was a special person, and even more. You know, he was a bit strange boy. A real genius, and sometimes, you know, he was coming from the suburbs, so he didn't have very easy. It was not too easy for him to be part of the school, and sometimes he didn't get only A's, but even worse marks. And you know, in 1943, you know, the seminary is at the borders between the German occupiers and the partisans. And of course, it also led to warlike situations. So the seminarists became very nervous because they didn't know what would happen, what would take place. So the month went by, and then they decided that the seminarists should be sent home. So this happened in April 1944. So that they could have at least something to eat at home with their families, because they didn't have anything to eat practically in their seminary. And then they could return to the seminary, and then they were sent back home in June again. And then after June, there was no opportunity to reopen the seminary. The school year. So this was the school year of 1943-1944, when these young students had to stay at home. So this was, I would say, a preludium to what was experienced this year and previous year by students. The bishop of these times, so when the bishop sent these young students home, wrote to a card, and here I quote, "Love Jesus Christ, cling to his adorable person more and more until your last breath. contemplate him persistently until you know all about him from memory and even until you become like him." Unquote.
Portate l'abito talare, 14 anni. Portate l'abito talare. Questo è un dato che voglio sottolineare perché non sarà secondario nella vicenda di Rolando. L'insulto che vi fa soffrire sarà per
this would
voi
mean
un onore.
very severe problems, so pay attention to this,
Attraverso l'abito
because
che portate,
you know, with this clothing that you are wearing currently,
la fortezza.
you will be given light, strength, and power, and this is going to be the symbol of the presence of Christ.
Rolando va a casa, dunque.
Rolando returned home and started a new life program, namely that he's going to study, he will keep his faith, and he will participate in the life of the parish. And of course, he's going to wear the reverenda. Of course, he was not. It was not bigotry. He was a joyful young boy. He was open. He loved to play. Still, he wanted to wear this special clothing because he saw that he was. He really felt his connection with Jesus. And this is a sentence pretty often quoted by him: "I belong to Jesus." So this is in which we can really summarize his life and his holiness. I belong to Christ. And the clothing, this reverenda, is his symbol. And it's not by chance that before his martyrdom, it was taken off from him and then just torn and turned into a football, a bowl, and was used as a football by the partisans before the death of Rolando, so before he was killed, he was murdered. You know, continuity appeared in his wearing of this clothing. So it can also be said, it can be mentioned that, yeah, he was a good boy. He was a good behaving boy. He was really characterized by his love for his homeland. What do I mean by homeland? The specific people, families, feelings, that peace, fraternity, brotherhood, Christian culture, which is based on the commandment of Jesus, as mentioned before. So Catholics really appreciated this, and they wanted to fight against fascism. Maybe he himself wanted to become member of the Christian partisans, but of course, it couldn't be avoided to be heard by some radical communists, and as a result thereof, Rolando was a victim of a fight among partisans. This took place on the 10th of April, 1945.
Coming from the mass to home, Rolando goes to a small forest to study, because he could study well there. And at noon, he used to be precise. He used to arrive precisely home at noon to take lunch together with his parents. And he didn't arrive at that time. And on that day, their fathers started to look for him. They found their books with but didn't find Rolando, but found a small note by the partisans that don't look for your son. He will come to us. From now on. From that on, the hours of anxiety started for the parents. Rolando were kidnapped by the extremist partisans far away, 25 kilometers away. They close him on a farm and they torture him. And the very next day, they take him in a forest and they shut him down. He's killed. He's buried under dried leaves. The parents, together with the parish priest, start to look for the boy. They find the killer, who tells them that he had to be executed because he was a spy. A lot of penal courts happened. The first instance, then a second instance, and these courts are closed by saying that Rolando were killed because of the hatred of his priestly clothes. An Italian priest wrote at the time, Bruno Mazzirali wrote about the boy. He was a child Christ, on the shoulder of whom the cross was put. It is a terrible sight. It is terrible to see. It's horrible to see any cases where innocent people are sacrificed by the world. 5th of October 2013, Pope Francis beatified Rolando. I hope he would be only the first. He would be the first who is beatified amongst all the other martyrs. I'd like to summarize what I wanted to tell you today. If you want, you can ask questions, or you can share your opinions with me. What God wants to say about the number of our churches through these martyrdoms. Who are these martyrs? In summary, I can say that they are the witnesses of resurrection of Christ. Why they accepted martyrdom? Because they were not afraid of death. They knew that their life doesn't end with their martyrdom, but a new life. It is the start of the beginning of a new life, which is much brighter. Without resurrection, martyrdom would be a complete madness. It's a contradiction. It would be the denial of life, rejection of life. If there is resurrection, martyrdom is the source of hope. Through these priests, God shows the victory of our faith. The victory of our faith, because faith in the eyes of the world is something which is able to give hope even beyond death. It can give love and it can give reconciliation.
Lasciamo dunque cadere ogni pensiero di odio, di rivendicazione.
Leave behind every hatred, every rivalry, every unjust feeling of supremacy. Let's enter into the practice of humility, which makes people great, which enables us to step into the eternal life. Let's step into this logic. Let's be the witnesses of reconciliation and forgiveness. Forgiveness is not against anybody. Forgiveness will not cancel the limit between good and bad things, but it helps us to step in a dimension which is much greater than the dimension of the earthly life, where we can survive every wounds, every injuries. We can step in the realm of peace and serenity. Through these martyrs, we can see the deeper meaning of priesthood. The priest is one with Christ. That's why he can offer his life. He can give his life for the people. If we priests, we say, this is my body, this is my blood, then we must be able to give our life. And we have to live in a way that our life should always be part of the death and resurrection of Christ, because he gave his life for us, and we have to live for him and for every brothers and sisters of ours. Thank you for your attention. I think that if the organizers allow us to ask questions, perhaps we have opportunity. No, it's not possible.
Possible? Il est possible? Non. Non. Alors, on ne m'a pas donné la possibilité de vous écouter. Non mi hanno dato la possibilità di ascoltare.
So I didn't get the opportunity to answer questions, but I hope it was worth coming here. Thank you.